When you were setting up ISA in Mohali, one of the chemistry teachers told you, just leave your PowerPoint slides behind. We'll teach philosophy.
Oh God, yeah. No. I was in the committee for the inaugural. I mean, when it was set up by Professor Satyanarayana. It's a great institute. He had great vision, brought in this course on humanities. So I was there as part of the curriculum committee to formulate the basic humanities section for that. And yes, because we managed to introduce history and philosophy of science too.
He was like, we'll just teach it. And you've mentioned that when you were starting out, there wasn't much respect for philosophy in India as a legitimate subject and as a career choice. Has that changed now over the years, or do you think philosophy still has a long way to go in India?
No, it has not changed at all.
At all?
Well, at all, there's one small change. I'll come to that. I think in principle, the suspicion towards philosophy has, in India, the strongest institutions are science institutions. IITs, ISAs, IISc, TIFR, and so on. Okay. And especially in comparison to that, we have very few social science institutes. There is no Indian Institute of Humanities anyway. We don't have any of that. So, and our education system is so skewed towards science that even social science subjects and literature subjects, including in Bangalore schools, I've been told, where teachers of science come to their social science class or English class and tell those teachers, I'm taking over this class because you don't need to teach them English. We need to finish syllabus, or they're all preparing for IITs.
Always happens.
So, we are like in such a kind of a hegemony of a particular kind of scientism, very, very unthought understanding of science. To go back to what you started off with Socrates, unexamined life is not worth living. I would also add to that people like Nagarjuna and others, but all the whole Buddhist tradition where examination in a very critical sense is a fundamental task of philosophy. So in fact, if you look at Mula Madhyamika Karika of Nagarjuna, it is all about examination of certain, very critical examination of movement, of the senses, of ideas of space, time, and so on. Okay, so there is this kind of a scientism, very unexamined understanding of science. And what has happened is that, it is not a surprise that science institutions did not want philosophy. So the ISER example was just one example of a larger belief system about what are you guys doing in, not just philosophy, in social sciences. Literature, of course, doesn't figure into that thing at all. So it's a very odd thing which we have. On the one hand, we have very strong science departments. On the other hand, humanities is hijacked by English. And this very odd discipline called English, which dominates Indian arts, which is, on both sides we are stuck. Because this, anyway, I won't say anything more. I have many good friends in English departments, so I'll keep quiet. But the point is, science departments are, science institutions didn't feel that it was necessary to engage with philosophy at all. Neither history. They didn't think it is, okay, so let me say it, what does it matter? Even at IISc and so on. An institution which was actually started by J.N. Tata, in the earlier part, including Vivekananda, was associated with some thought ideas about IISc. The importance of humanities, which included psychology, and the larger context of social ideas of society was so important. And it has never been allowed to flourish there. It never been allowed to be there. And every time I used to tell people, look, if your model of all Indian institutions, all models are Harvard, Princeton, Oxford, etc., all of them have as good a philosophy or history and English literature department as your physics and chemistry and maths. But, this is the problem of this kind of resource crunch and, power games, that all of them have completely eliminated any notions of very meaningful, strong, independent, rigorous, accountable humanities departments in any of these places. And these are all public funded. And so one way to continue that is to scoff at philosophy and other disciplines. The problem is not an examined critique. It's just a rhetorical critique so that you don't enter into their space. So, so in that sense, I find that continues a lot. It's very difficult for any of our universities and science departments to have meaningful philosophy programs. Bangalore University had one, they had closed it, and I hear they've opened it now. When Bangalore City University started, and Professor Jaffet was the first vice chancellor, and he came from National Law School, and he was very interested in philosophy. So I helped them set up a complete philosophy program, master's philosophy program. So he had set up a committee, we sat, we discussed for different departments, and for philosophy, we designed a whole course and everything I did and got teachers for it. But in 2 years, they closed it down. Although they had more students in it than in other departments too. So the point is, this is a very odd thing. So that in India, there are many different things. One from the science group, that these things don't matter. And the other problem is one from the caste question in philosophy. So if the question of philosophy is often in the Indian context, has been too much associated with dominant Brahminical traditions. Although, when they say that they are completely unaware of the kind of work of Buddhist traditions, which even Ambedkar draws upon, or the Jaina traditions, or the Charvaka traditions, and so on. While they are still there was one aspect of a dominant Indian philosophical theme through Vedanta, like through Radhakrishna and which also meant that since our institutions and universities were getting public situations were becoming far more caste conscious, they thought that philosophy is a particular representation of caste problem. So they too were quite antagonistic to philosophy. So, and then what did we end up with? Because philosophy was accepted in some of the, like University of Hyderabad, IIT Bombay for some very odd reason, etc. You ended up just studying Kant and Wittgenstein and Heidegger. And I think India has produced more theses on these people than even in Germany, or Britain. Because almost every student I know would do something like that. And quite disillusioned system of work we produced in that. Because, it is very important to have studied them and learned from them, but to have seen that all of philosophy through that framework meant that other departments and other people didn't find anything of value of talking to them. So which means philosophy departments became very isolated. And a lot more philosophy in India was being done in other departments, like in sociology, like in political science, even in the literature departments. And the philosophy department didn't open its classrooms to the other department students. There was no, like I could go at Purdue and learn philosophy because I could go into the department and sit. Every place I go to, I ask them, why don't you allow, science students and management students, etc. to come? But, that didn't happen. So it is always like you had this very exclusive community built around things. And one of the ways they continued the exclusion was to talk about philosophy which had nothing to do with the public. The only way they could understand philosophy was saying, we don't understand what these people talk about. So in other words, all of this alienated philosophy as a general discipline. But in recent times, the last 10 years at least, the growth of private universities, which is another racket in India, starting, like Ashoka and various other Kriya and various other things, they all have philosophy departments. They do philosophy because they are doing the American model. And for the American model, philosophy departments still have some role to play. They are not going to eliminate them. And maybe they'll teach, critical thinking or whatever it is. They hijack certain thematics for them and say, these are the things you guys teach, logic and stuff. So all these private universities are hiring philosophy students to do this. But then many of them perpetuate the same old crap. It's not that they are still recognizing that, philosophy is such a lived discourse, that there are people at all levels of society engaging with it in their own manner. And many times confusion comes because they're not able to recognize it as philosophy or whatever. And that there are techniques to think through these things. So they still become very exclusive. They're sitting in their own writing and, this sudden obsession about philology. And did these people mean that by that word they used? All of philosophy has been reduced to that. Yeah, so
Semantics.
Not a wonder nobody was going to do, yeah. And why would people want to engage with it? Why would, for a very long time, why didn't philosophy departments in India look at the question of caste as a philosophical problem? Since you had mentioned we're coming to a cracked mirror, I'm just saying as a part of it, that is part of, why is it, how do you philosophically understand this process? Why is patriarchy outside analytical philosophical frameworks? I mean, do your Wittgenstein, do your Kant, but how are you going to think about these things too? And I'm not saying that all of philosophers have to think about these things, but I'm saying anyway they are. I mean, Kant is responding to science in such a deep manner. He's responding to Newton. He's finding a language to legitimize Newton's monumental work on motion and gravity. And it's not that he's sitting somewhere and writing something in some German for somebody to make sense of. It arises as a way to resolve that fundamental contradictions in Newton's ideas of space and time. But here you have all these philosophy people sitting within some books and not even recognizing that there is a world outside to which they have to respond. All the great philosophers whom they're responding, whether it is Aristotle tradition or Kant or even Heidegger or even Husserl to this extent, they're all engaged very deeply with the world around them and engaged with very specific questions about being human, being society, which drives their philosophy. See, so why was it so difficult for Asians and Africans to do in a far more meaningful manner, particularly in India? So that's a constant struggle. I do think that we need some kind of a thing, but I'm sure many of my philosophy colleagues may not agree. But that's why I'm not part of the community now. But what I'm saying is there are other ways we can actually engage with it and do, raise this question of thinking about what is philosophy.